Hello everyone and welcome to our tutorial here on NoiseJunkies.net. In this Cinema 4D tutorial, we'll learn how to create this cool abstract cloud simulation and then this lens flare in Photoshop. We'll just really add very basic steps in Photoshop, and the main bulk of this tutorial is to explain how you can use Pyrocluster to create some very interesting colorful clouds and then apply some effectors to it to add dynamics and rotation, all that sweet stuff. So, before we get started, yes, it's been a while since I started making tutorials, but I'll try to get involved. I've been very busy recently, and I think I might record a tutorial today, maybe two, and hopefully release 3 tutorials in less than 2 weeks, because I know you guys have been waiting for a while. Thanks for holding up, and stay tuned, please. And, well, now that I have my personal message delivered, let's jump straight ahead to Cinema 4D. Okay, so now that we're here in Cinema 4D, you can create a new file by going to File, New, as usual. And the first thing we want to create now is an environment. And it's kind of like a background, but you don't really see it as a background, it's just there. And now you want to create an emitter, because that's what's going to be emitting the particles, the clouds. Now, generally we would use emitters as a sphere or a primitive, and we would just drag that inside the emitter and then it would emit that. But with Pyrocluster is a little bit different. You don't actually need a primitive to drag inside the particles. The particles are actually created with a material. So we'll go to File, and just below New Material there's a shader, and in shader you can select the Pyrocluster and then select the Pyrocluster volume tracer. So it's very important that you have those two materials in here. With the Pyrocluster volume tracer, with the yellow arrow, you are going to apply that to the environment. So this volume tracer pretty much is going to read and recognize that Pyrocluster is in the scene. And this Pyrocluster material, which has this cloud icon, is actually the Pyrocluster cloud generator, which you're going to be applying to the emitter. So now if you just play the animation here and then select a frame and render, you can see that the particles are there already, so it's actually pretty simple to create the actual cloud, the actual fog. So by default it's all white, a cloud, but for this tutorial we're actually going to be creating an interesting gradient in here. And I'm going to be choosing purple to pink, I believe, to light pink like this. So if you render that, you already can see, it's really interesting. It already changes everything. Now you also notice that it takes a little while to render, and there's some things we can do to make this better and make it more light. So for the age, for example, we have all those age effects which makes it fade out a little bit, and they're nice, but they're not gonna make a huge difference for this particular project. And unless you're really looking for a lot of photorealism for cloud generation, I don't think you're gonna need them. Also the distance effect, which is also this fade out, don't use them. Just leave them unchecked like that, and it's definitely going to save a lot of render time for you. Not that much right now, but it will later. Another thing that's going to save a lot of render time is in shape. You can set the radius to something like 40 maybe, and the maximum visibility to actually set the maximum visible to 40, and then the radius to something like 20. And yeah, definitely saves a lot of time, but not exactly the coolest thing we're going to be creating. So there's still some things to play around with. One of them is in the shadows. You want it to cast shadows and to self shadows, so it's going to kind of have also a dark edge to itself. Also in globals, coming back, we can actually set the volume from 100% to 20%, and that's going to make it a little more spread out and puffy, as you can see it in here. So yeah, I think that's it for the actual cloud, but naturally you want to create more than 10 birth rate editors. So I'm going to say 50 and then 50 as well, and this should create a lot of particles. You can create a new camera, but just to save time, I'm just going to pan around in the view here and face the emitter in a frontwards position like this, so that the particles are now coming towards, and I'm going to rotate it a little more so it's like facing directly. And now if you render it, you have the particles definitely coming towards you, and it's very foggy and very puffy, as we discussed. So we're getting there. I actually think this is awesome, but there's some things we could change potentially. Uh, One of them is that in the gradient, instead of a pink, we could use like maybe a blue color. It would kind of be nice. And here, more like a light purple. Also in the meter, I think 50 particles is just way too much. Let's try 20 and see what happens. Okay, that's cool. We're gonna leave it like that. Now, another thing I want to create is a sky, and I want to create a material for that sky, and it's supposed to be a dark color. I'm gonna create a very dark blue, almost black, like so, and apply to it. And now on the same icon here with the emitters, I want to apply the rotation tool and make sure this cube here is just really big to cover it. If you play back the animation now, you see that the particles are rotating in a very interesting manner. You can also play around with the angle speed. So if I set the angle speed to 10, for example, they're definitely going to speed slower and more crumbled up. And if you set it to 60, well, that's going to create a lot more mass, and they're going to be just much more faster and everywhere. So for the emitter now, I actually want to bring this up a little bit. I'll put 40 and 40. And yeah, I think that would just, before it looked just too voluminous, whatever. Before it just looked like a lot of volume in there, but now the rotation tool, it actually looks fine. So I think that's cool. I think that's nice. I'm actually gonna do a final adjustment on the color, but just find whatever you find the best for you. I think this worked nice for us. And what I'm gonna do now is just do a quick render by going to render settings and then setting this to best, setting the output to something big like this, and then saving in a path. Cool. And then a render to picture viewer. And now that you have your simulation that's already kind of cool and useful, you can bring it to Photoshop to make it even cooler, which is what we're going to be doing right now. It shouldn't take too long for us to add the elements in Photoshop. So now in Photoshop, I just kind of open this file, and we can already start working on it. So now we can just open it in Photoshop and start working. I'm going to add the lens flare by going to Layer, New Layer, and then clicking OK. Also uncheck the background, just unlock it. And now on this top layer with the black color selected, just make it black and go to Filter, Render, Lens Flare. Now, do you really need Photoshop to do a lens flare? Well, obviously not. In Cinema 4D, you could just create a light and then use it a lens flare, and I have a whole tutorial covering how to do that. I just thought it was just more convenient to work in Photoshop because it has this nice lens flare in here, and it'll just be easy for us. And then for the mode, you can set, there's many options you can actually use. I'm gonna be using linear dodge right now, but you do have those borders in here, so I want to create a mask for it by clicking on this icon, and then getting the brush tool, selecting the color black, and then you can just do this fade out. I hope you guys knew this trick before, because that's like a Photoshop survival thing. Do it all the time. What we can do now is to add some interesting layer of a star field. And again, you could also create that in Cinema 4D, the star field in the background itself, but I just prefer to do it in Photoshop because it's just cool and you have more control over it. So for the noise, I'm just gonna create something. Yeah, it has to be a little more random, like so, not very strong, and blend it and set the opacity to something like 40%. And last but not least, new adjustment layer and then curves. You can play around with the tone you want for this. I'm actually gonna make the RGB a little brighter. Yeah, and there you can already create your interesting abstract clouds, which you can also, of course, use as a background for your text or your logo. There you go, Noise Junkies, where clouds live. So anyways, that's just how you can create your animation in Cinema 4D and just some small touches in Photoshop. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.